Beneath Michigan's peaceful forests, shimmering lakes, and quiet towns, lies a hidden world of ancient secrets and eerie legends. From mysterious underwater stone circles to haunted dunes shaped by grief, this state holds more than just natural beauty. It holds forgotten stories, unexplained phenomena, and remnants of civilizations long vanished. In this journey through Michigan's ancient mysteries, we'll uncover the strange, the sacred, and reveal why the past here never really stays buried. The Sanilac petroglyphs. Hidden deep in Michigan's Thumb region, surrounded by dense forest and whispering leaves, lies a sandstone outcrop etched with mysterious carvings, the Sanilac petroglyphs. Initially glance, they may seem like simple rock drawings, but the closer you look, the more questions begin to stir. Who carved them? When? And perhaps most haunting of all, why? The site, known as Ezibigadekasin in the Anishab language, meaning written on stone, is considered sacred by the local Native American tribes, especially the Ojibwe. The carvings themselves, around 100 in total, are spread across a 1,000-square-foot patch of fragile sandstone, etched with symbols that range from the spiritual to the cryptic. There are recognizable human figures, animals, and abstract patterns, each seeming to tell a fragment of a much larger story. But that story has been lost to time, layered in mystery, and filtered through the silence of centuries. Let's start with what we can actually see. One of the most prominent figures is known as the bowman, a human-like form with a drawn bow aimed directly at another symbol. Some interpret this as a warrior, a hunter, or possibly even a guardian spirit. Others believe it depicts a cosmological battle, the kind where celestial beings fight over the fate of the earth. The posture is dynamic, the lines sharp and confident, clearly the work of a skilled hand, not random scratching. Fenthir's the spirit being, a large figure with what appear to be horns or rays extending from its head. This one really stirs the imagination. Is it a deity? A shaman in ceremonial dress? Or something more enigmatic? Perhaps a representation of a non-human entity experienced in ritual or vision quests. Nearby, symbols that resemble turtles, birds, and abstract waves fill the stone like a puzzle waiting to be decoded. But here's where things get tricky. There's no definitive way to date petroglyphs like these. Sandstone is soft, and erosion is constant. Most archaeologists estimate the carvings to be between 300 and 1,000 years old, likely created during the late woodland period, but those are just educated guesses. Oral histories from the Ojibwe and Powhatan tell of ancient ancestors who used the area as a ceremonial site long before European contact, possibly stretching the timeline back even further. What's undeniable is the spiritual weight the site carries. For the Anishinaabe people, these are not just pictures. They're portals, living teachings etched into the earth meant to guide and remind. Elders say each carving has layers of meaning, often only revealed after years of contemplation and learning. Unlike modern writing, where everything is literal, these symbols are meant to awaken the intuitive part of the mind. They're maps of the soul, not just the land. Of course, as with many sacred indigenous sites, the Sanol petroglyphs have not been immune to damage. The carvings were first revealed to non-native awareness after a massive forest fire in 1881 cleared away the brush that had hidden them for generations. Since then, the site has suffered from erosion, vandalism, and well-meaning but clumsy preservation efforts. Some of the original images have faded beyond recognition, and there are heartbreaking tales of tourists or locals trying to trace the carvings with chalk or even knives, accelerating their decay. Even so, the petroglyphs persist, some almost defiantly. Michigan's Department of Natural Resources now co-manages the site with the Saginaw Indian tribe, a move that has helped bring the spiritual importance of the carvings back to the forefront. Traditional ceremonies are held here again. Offerings are made, stories are shared, and perhaps most importantly, the carvings are being reread, not with the cold lens of archaeology alone, but through the warm voice of ancestral memory. And here's where the mystery deepens further. Some researchers believe the petroglyphs might, not be a standalone creation, but part of a much broader network of ancient communication across the Great Lakes region. Similar carvings have been found in Ontario, Wisconsin, and Minnesota. Always near water, always in areas tied to native travel routes or seasonal camps. It's possible these sites formed a symbolic trail guiding people both physically and spiritually through a sacred landscape. Others have gone even further into speculative territory. A small but vocal group of fringe theorists claim that the snail petroglyphs could be remnants of a lost civilization older than the Ansonia, possibly even predating the last ice age. They point to some of the more abstract symbols as evidence of advanced knowledge. Star charts, energy diagrams, or even extraterrestrial contact. Mainstream archaeology dismisses these ideas, of course, but it's hard to stand at the edge of that stone and not feel the weight of the unknown pressing in. And what about the carvings we can't see? That might be the most chilling part. Locals speak of additional stones once nearby that were either buried, stolen, or destroyed before anyone realized their significance. Imagine a book with half its pages torn out and burned. That's what we're left with. A fragment of a message echoing across centuries, waiting for someone to finish the sentence. Even today, after decades of study, we're left with more questions than answers. What kind of society took the time and effort to create these carvings? Were they meant for the entire tribe or just initiated members? Were the symbols spontaneous or part of a complex language we no longer understand? And what stories died with the elders who were never asked? The site remains open to the public, though with limited access. Visitors walk quietly along a wooden boardwalk, eyes scanning the sandstone surface as if expecting the images to shift or speak. And maybe in a way they do. There's something ancient and alive in those lines, something that tugs at the edge of your thoughts and whispers. There's more here than you realize. Some say if you visit just after dawn, when the light hits the stone at just the right angle, the carvings seem to glow. Shadows deep in the cuts, and the rock surface seems to ripple. In those moments, it's easy to imagine you're not alone, that someone or something is still watching from the forest edge, that the spirits etched in a stone are still waiting for the next listener to understand. The copper mines of Isle Royale. Far out in the cold, rugged waters of Lake Superior lies Isle Royale, a remote and wild stretch of land that most people know today for its natural beauty and moose-wolf ecosystem. But buried deep beneath its forested ridges and rocky cliffs is one of the most baffling and enduring mysteries in North American history, the ancient copper mines. These aren't the remnants of colonial exploitation or industrial venture, and they raise one unavoidable question. Who was mining all that copper, and where did it all go? Archaeologists have long acknowledged that Native American cultures were mining copper in this region as far back as 5,000 to 7,000 years ago during what's known as the Archaic period. You can still see the hammerstones they used. Smooth lake rocks used to pound away at the veins of native copper. No smelting, no modern tools, just raw pure copper pulled directly from the earth. It's one of the only places on the continent where metal could be used straight out of the ground. And it wasn't just Isle Royale. The entire Carina Peninsula, which juts out from Michigan's Upper Peninsula into Lake Superior, is laced with the remnants of these ancient workings. There are an estimated 10,000 prehistoric mining pits, some over 20 feet deep, scattered across the region. But it's not the number of pits that raises eyebrows. It's the sheer volume of copper that appears to have been extracted. By some estimates, ancient miners removed over 500,000 tons of pure copper from the area. That's a staggering amount, especially for people with only stone tools. So where did it all go? That's the question that's baffled researchers, historians, and adventurers for generations. Because if you try to match that volume of copper with what we find in known Native American archaeological sites across the continent, ceremonial items, jewelry, tools, it doesn't add up. Not even close. A few copper spear points here, a ceremonial plate there, but nothing that suggests hundreds of thousands of tons of material. It's as if the copper just vanished. And that's where the mystery begins to spiral. Some scholars suggest that the copper was traded across the continent, gradually dispersed through vast trade networks that stretch from the Great Lakes all the way to the Gulf of Mexico and the American Southwest. There is solid evidence to support this copper artifacts from the Great Lakes have been found in Hopewell burial mounds in Ohio and even among the Mississippian cultures far to the south. But again, the math doesn't work. Even accounting for widespread trade, we're still missing the bulk of the extracted copper. That mystery has opened the door to more radical theories. One of the most persistent is the idea that an unknown old world civilization, Phoenicians, Minoans, or even Egyptians crossed the Atlantic long before Columbus arrived in the Great Lakes region and exploited its copper deposits for their own use. Proponents of this theory point to oddities like petroglyphs that resemble Mediterranean symbols, old legends that hint at visitors from across the sea, and a sheer industrial scale of mining that seems hard to reconcile with the Tolkitoff archaic North American cultures. Of course, mainstream archaeology remains deeply skeptical. There's no hard evidence of pre-Columbian trans-oceanic contact in the Copper Country, no ancient ships, no Middle Eastern tools or inscriptions. Still, the mystery gnaws at the edges of historical certainty. If not old world civilizations, then who? And why mine so much copper if it wasn't being hoarded or used locally? The deeper you look into Is Royale itself, the more intriguing it becomes. The island is incredibly remote. Getting there, even today, requires a long ferry or seaplane ride. Yet ancient miners made the trip, hauling tools and supplies across treacherous water. Once there, they set up seasonal camps and dug through dense bedrock, often tunneling deep into the earth with nothing more than fire-hardened sticks and stone mauls. You can still see the blackened rock where they used fire to weaken the stone before hammering it away. In recent years, LAR surveys and advanced ground-penetrating radar have revealed even more extensive networks of pits and tunnels, some of which appear to go deeper than anyone previously realized. In places, the miners followed narrow copper veins with surgical precision, almost as if they had some kind of geological knowledge that went beyond trial and error. And then there's the ceremonial angle. Among the copper artifacts that have survived, many were not utilitarian. They weren't knives or axes or fishing tools. They were ornate, shaped into elaborate forms like crescent and thunderbirds. These pieces suggest that copper wasn't just a resource. It was sacred. The metal held power. The people who extracted it may have seen themselves not just as workers, but as spiritual intermediaries pulling divine material from the bones of the earth. Some native oral traditions hint at this. In Ojibwe stories, copper is considered a gift from the spirit world. It was to be used with respect and only in ways that honored its origin. Some believe that the reason much of the copper is missing is because it was never meant to be accumulated or displayed. It was buried, returned to the land in ritual, or simply deemed too sacred for casual use. But not all the stories are reverent. There are darker legends, too. Some tribes speak of a time when powerful beings, or even giants, mined the copper for themselves, non-human entities that ruled the area long before people arrived. These stories are often dismissed as myth, but they're consistent enough across different tribal traditions to make you wonder, could they be symbolic memories of something long forgotten? Then there's the eerie silence surrounding the end of the mining. At some point around 1200 BCE, the mining simply stopped. Not gradually, not in a slow decline. It just ended. Why? There's no sign of war or catastrophe. No environmental shift that would make the area uninhabitable. It's as if the ancient miners vanished or were said to stop. What really happened out there on Is Royale thousands of years ago? Were these miners isolated bands, overly Americans, slowly carving out copper with hand tools over centuries? Or were they part of something much bigger? A forgotten chapter of history where cultures rose and fell, leaving behind only the scars and the stone. The island doesn't offer many answers. Today, the old pits are overgrown with moss, the tools rusted or buried, the ancient campsites dissolved into forest. But if you walk the rocky trails near McCargo Cove or sit quietly by Monong Ridge, you can still feel the weight of what once happened there. The copper is still in the ground, gleaming in fractured veins, and a mystery is still in the air, thick and silent, like the cold breath of the lake. The mysterious mounds of Niles, tucked into the southwest corner of Michigan, the quiet town of Niles sits near the banks of the St. Joseph River. Today, it's a peaceful place known more for its small-town charm than for any deep historical enigmas. But beneath the soil of this unassuming landscape lie ancient earthen structures, mounds, some still intact, others long since flattened or forgotten, that point to a civilization far older than the town itself. These mounds, constructed by people we now call the Hopewell or Adena cultures, are among the most mysterious and poorly understood remnants of Michigan's ancient past. They weren't just random piles of dirt. These mounds were deliberately shaped, carefully aligned, and often packed with spiritual or ceremonial significance. Some were burial sites. Others may have served as astronomical observatories or places of ritual. And although the forests and plows of modern life have claimed many of them, early accounts from settlers and antiquarians speak of large conical mounds rising from the earth like ancient monuments, silent, imposing, and deeply out of place in what's now a suburban landscape. The Hopewell culture, named after a farm in Ohio, where many artifacts were first studied, thrived roughly between 100 BC and 500 CE. Their influence stretched across the Midwest, from Illinois to New York, and south into the Mississippi Valley. Niles, positioned at a key crossroad between the Great Lakes and inland river systems, would have been an ideal location for settlement and trade. And the presence of these mounds suggests it was more than a stopover. It was a hub, a spiritual and social center for a people whose sophistication we're only beginning to grasp. Early records from 19th century explorers and settlers described numerous mounds in the Niles area. Some were solitary, standing 10 to 20 foot tall, while others were part of complex groupings, circular and rectangular enclosures, raised platforms, and carefully shaped ridges that, in a time before aerial surveys or satellite imagery, people were astonished at the scale and precision. They couldn't believe indigenous peoples could have created something so advanced. And so the myths began. Some early Americans attributed the mounds to a lost race. Perhaps the fabled mound builders supposedly wiped out before the ancestors of modern tribes ever arrived. Others went even further, suggesting links to the ancient Egyptians, the Phoenicians, or even the builders of Stonehenge. These ideas have since been debunked by archaeology, but they reveal just how shocking and impressive the structures once were. Today, only a handful of these ancient earthworks remain visible in and around Niles. Many were destroyed during farming, development, or road construction, regarded at the time as mere Indian mounds, obstacles to be flattened or looted. Artifacts uncovered from those that were excavated included pottery, stone tools, copper ornaments, and occasionally human remains. But what's most striking is what those artifacts reveal about the culture itself. The Hopewell weren't a primitive or isolated people. They were part of a vast and interconnected web of trade and ritual that stretched across the eastern half of North America. Materials found in their mounds came from distant places. Mica from the Appalachian Mountains, obsidian from the Rockies, seashells from the Gulf of Mexico, and copper from the Lake Superior region. These weren't just goods. They were sacred objects carried long distances and placed with reverence in mounds like those in Niles. That suggests a civilization that valued ceremony as much as survival. And what about the mound's architecture? Some align with solar events, solstices, equinoxes, and lunar cycles. This indicates a deep understanding of astronomy and timekeeping, likely woven into religious observance. In some sites across the Midwest, mounds were laid out to reflect star patterns, such as the Plates or Orion. It's unknown if the Niles mounds followed this celestial blueprint, but given their cultural context, it's very possible. One particularly eerie detail mentioned in older records is that some of the Niles mounds contained multiple burials, often layered over time. In some cases, the dead were buried with elaborate grave goods, pipes, jewelry, or effigies. In others, the remains were cremated and placed in urns. It's believed these weren't just everyday burials. They were ceremonies, send-offs for spiritual leaders, warriors, or individuals who played key roles in the community. But there's another layer to the mystery. Many Native American oral traditions, particularly among the Potawatomi and Ojibwe, speak of the mounds not just as burial sites, but as places of power. According to these stories, the mounds were built where the Earth's energy was strongest, natural intersections of spiritual force. Some tribes believed the spirits of ancestors still lingered in these places, watching over the land, guiding the living. Others warned against disturbing the mounds, saying it could bring misfortune or illness. In his context, the destruction of the Nile's mounds becomes more than just a historical tragedy. It's a spiritual loss, an eraser of sacred geometry and ancestral memory. And yet, the land remembers. Locals in certain parts of Niles have long reported strange phenomena in areas once home to large mounds. Unexplained lights in the woods, feelings of being watched, unusual animal behavior, even dreams filled with images of fire, stone, and shadowed figures. Of course, not all mysteries are paranormal. Some are archaeological. In the 1990s, a local push began to reassess some of the area's forgotten sites. Old maps were pulled from archives, soil samples were tested, and community members started to realize just how much had been lost and how much might still lie beneath the surface. Ground-penetrating radar scans in nearby areas have revealed anomalies, subtle rises, buried ditches, circular depressions. These might be the remnants of mounds, lodges, or ceremonial rings, their shapes just waiting to be uncovered again. There's also speculation that a much larger mound complex once existed along the St. Joseph River, possibly a regional ceremonial center akin to Ohio's Newark Earthworks or Illinois' Cahokia. If true, this would completely rewrite Nile's place in North American history. It wouldn't be a footnote, it would be a focal point. For now, the surviving mounds are protected, though many remain unmarked or uncelebrated. A few sit quietly in public parks, their significance unknown to passing joggers or dog walkers. Others are hidden in wooded lots, remembered only by local historians and elders. But they're still there, silent, ancient, and watching. If you stand near one of these forgotten mounds at sunset, when the air grows cool and the light slants low, you might feel something stir. Not fear exactly, but awe. The kind that comes when you realize you're walking across ground that once held ceremonies, prayers, and the remains of those long gone. The past isn't dead in Niles. It's just buried, waiting patiently for someone to listen. The Sleeping Bear Dunes legend. High above the sparkling blue waters of Lake Michigan, where the shoreline curves into towering sand hills, lies a landscape steeped in both breathtaking beauty and ancient sorrow. The Sleeping Bear Dunes aren't just a geological marvel. They're the setting of one of the most poignant Native American legends passed down through generations. To those who know the story, the rolling dunes aren't just sand. They're memory, love, and loss, shaped over centuries by wind, time, and tears. The legend begins far across the lake in what is now Wisconsin, where a great forest fire once raged through the homeland of a mother bear and her two cubs. As flames tore through the woods, the mother bear gathered her young and fled toward the water's edge. With no time to lose and nowhere else to go, she plunged into the vast expanse of Lake Michigan, her cubs following close behind. The swim was long and brutal. Waves rose high. The cold numbed their paws and pulled at their fur. Yet the mother bear pressed forward, driven by a force stronger than exhaustion. Her love for her children and her determination to save them. She reached the far shore, climbing up a steep dune to wait, breathless and soaked. Scanning the horizon for the tiny heads of her cubs, she waited as the sun moved across the sky, waited as the wind shifted and clouds thickened. But her cubs never arrived. The mother bear curled herself into the sand, heartbroken, eyes fixed on the lake. Days passed, then moons, then years, and she never moved. In time, the Great Spirit took pity on her grief and transformed her body into a great dune so that she could forever watch over the water where her cubs were last seen. But the story doesn't end there. Moved by the mother's devotion, the Great Spirit created two islands, North and South Manitou, just off the coast. These, it is said, are her cubs, honored and remembered, preserved as part of the land itself. Together, the sleeping bear and her children form a sacred trinity etched into the geography of the Michigan shoreline and etched even deeper into the hearts of those who hear their tale. From a scientific point of view, the formation of the dunes is well understood. Thousands of years ago, glaciers carved and scraped the land, leaving behind massive deposits of sand, gravel, and clay. When the ice retreated, winds picked up the sand and piled it into the vast hills we see today. The landscape is constantly changing. Even now, the dunes shift a few feet each year. But science, as accurate as it is, cannot explain why these dunes feel so alive, so haunting, or why people feel compelled to whisper when they reach the summit and look out over the lake. The Sleeping Bear Dunes legend is part of a Nab tradition told and retold by the Ojai and Odawa peoples. But like many indigenous stories, it functions on multiple levels. It's not just about love or grief. It's a teaching story, a reminder of perseverance, sacrifice, an eternal bond between mother and child. It also ties the people to the land in a deeply spiritual way. The story isn't just set in the landscape. It is the landscape, and that's something Western minds often miss. In native cosmology, geography and story are one and the same. There's another layer, too, one of warning and respect. The Mother Bear's Vigil is a reminder that nature remembers, that the earth holds its losses just as people do. For native communities, the dunes aren't just a tourist attraction. They're sacred ground, and the legend is a living narrative, not a myth sealed in a museum. It evolves, breathes, and continues to offer wisdom to those willing to listen. But as tourism grew in the 20th century, the spiritual weight of the dunes was often overlooked. The creation of Sleeping Bear Dunes National Lakeshore in 1970 brought protection to the region, but also drew crowds. People climb the dunes, tumble down the sandy slopes, and picnic along the bluffs, often unaware of the deeper meaning beneath their feet. To counter this, local tribal elders have worked with park officials to include Insonia perspectives in signage, programs, and storytelling events. It's a slow process, but one that helps reconnect the land to its original voice. Even so, certain areas remain intentionally untouched. Some dunes are considered so sacred that tribal members ask they not be climbed. Ceremonies are occasionally held in secluded groves, often involving songs and offerings meant to honor the sleeping bear and her cubs. These aren't performances. They're spiritual acts woven into a worldview where animals, people, and land are deeply interdependent. And then there's the atmosphere itself. Anyone who's hiked the dunes near sunset knows there's something uncanny about the silence up there. The wind whispers like it's speaking a language just out of reach. The sand underfoot shifts in ways that feel oddly sentient. You get the distinct feeling that you're being watched, not by people, but by the land itself. It's not threatening. It's more like a presence, a quiet observer that remembers everything. The legend has also inspired generations of artists, writers, and dreamers. From paintings to poetry, the image of the grieving mother bear has become a symbol of enduring love. Some say that on certain nights when the moonlight is just right, you can see the shape of a bear in the dunes, not just in the broad curves of the hill, but in the shadows and textures, the arch of a back, the slant of a muzzle, the pause of a breath held across millennia. There are those who claim to have seen more. A glowing form at the top of the tallest dune, strange footprints where none should be, sounds that mimic the soft rumble of a bear's cry. Too low, too long to be anything else. Whether these are tricks of the mind or echoes from another world, no one can say for certain, but the stories persist. Ultimately, what makes the legend of the Sleeping Bear Dune so powerful isn't just the story itself. It's the way the story lives in the land. You don't need to believe every detail to feel its impact. You just have Vito stand there at the crest of that sandy hill, wind in your face, lake stretching to infinity, and imagine Amethyr Bear staring out across the water, still waiting. That's the magic of ancient stories. They turn landscapes into memory. They keep the past alive in the present. And they remind us that not all love ends in reunion. But some love becomes eternal, carved into stone, shaped into sand, and whispered through generations by the very earth itself. The underwater stone formation in Grand Traverse Bay. Beneath the cold, green-blue waters of Grand Traverse Bay, just off the northern coast of Michigan's Lower Peninsula, lies a mystery that has puzzled divers, researchers, and spiritual seekers alike. Discovered in 2007 during a routine underwater archaeological survey, a line of large stones, some weighing hundreds of pounds, sits on the lake bed in a formation that seems far too deliberate to be natural. But what truly electrified the mystery community was the discovery of one particular boulder marked with what appears to be the carving of a mastodon. If authentic, that single carving could change everything we think we know about the human history of this region. Let's start with the formation itself. Submerged roughly 40 feet below the surface, the stones are arranged in a linear path stretching dozens of feet across the lake bed. Divers describe it as a kind of underwater road or wall. The stones are similarly sized and spaced evenly to be a product of randomness or glacier activity. In fact, their alignment is eerily precise, almost as if they were laid down as a ceremonial causeway or calendar marker. Underwater archaeologist Dr. Mark Hawley, who led the team that discovered the formation, was using sonar to scan for shipwrecks when the image of the stone alignment first appeared. What they expected to find was timber or steel. What they found instead looked like something ancient, something that shouldn't have been there. And then came the mastodon. One of the boulders within an alignment bears markings, clear grooves etched into the stone. To the untrained eye, they might seem like scratches or wear from centuries underwater. But when examined closely, the pattern takes shape. The unmistakable outline of an animal with a long trunk, curved tusks, and a humped back. A mastodon, an extinct ice age mammal that roamed North America more than 10,000 years ago. If this carving is real, and that's still a big if, then it suggests that humans were present in Michigan far earlier than traditionally believed. To have seen a mastodon, let alone carved its likeness, the artist would have needed to be in the region before the end of the last ice age that pushes back the timeline of settlement by thousands of years and raises a cascade of other questions. Who were these people? Why did they carve this? And what was the purpose of the entire stone alignment? Mainstream archaeologists have approached the site cautiously. Some argue that the mastodon carving could be coincidental, natural strio interpreted as art by eager eyes. Others say the alignment could be the result of glacial movement, not human design. But the spacing and orientation of the stones seem to defy that explanation, and the location adds weight to the mystery. You see, around 10,000 years ago, much of Michigan was not water but land. The glaciers had only recently retreated, and what is now Lake Michigan was a much smaller body. Areas like Grand Traverse Bay would have been dry or marshy ground, a perfect location for migrating animals and the people who hunted them. If early hunter-gatherers occupied this landscape, they would have needed ways to guide migration, mark territories, or carry out rituals. The stone alignment might have served any or all of those purposes. One theory gaining quiet traction is that the site was a drive lane, a method used by ancient hunters to funnel large game into kill zones. Massive stones might have formed natural barriers directing mastodons or other megafauna toward a waiting party of hunters. If this theory holds, it could represent one of the oldest known hunting structures in North America, and that would be monumental. But not everyone sees the formation as utilitarian. Some believe it was ceremonial, perhaps a sacred site aligned with celestial events. Indigenous traditions across North America often described sacred stone paths, medicine wheels, and other earthworks used for tracking the stars or connecting with spiritual realms. Could this underwater alignment be Michigan's version of Stonehenge? Not in scale, perhaps, but possibly in purpose. To date, no major excavation has been launched. The site remains largely unexplored, partly due to its underwater location and partly due to the delicate politics surrounding such discoveries, that there's a hesitancy among official channels to declare the site man-made without indisputable proof. But among local tribes, there's growing interest. The Odawa and Ojibwe communities have oral traditions that speak of a time before the lakes, a time when a land stretched far and wide, when great animals walked side by side with humans. Elders tell of sacred places submerged when the waters rose, and of ancient knowledge now hidden beneath the waves. Whether these stories directly reference the Grand Traverse Bay site is unclear, but the resonance is impossible to ignore. What adds another eerie dimension to the story is how quietly this discovery has been handled. Unlike other archaeological finds that make headlines and spur media frenzy, the underwater stones have remained largely in the background, mentioned in niche forums, whispered among history buffs, but never truly spotlighted. Why? Some suggest it's caution, scientific integrity, waiting for more data. Others believe it's politics, with officials hesitant to disturb a potentially sacred site or provoke controversy. But there's also a theory whispered among fringe researchers that something more is being hidden, that the formation might tie into a much older, forgotten chapter of human history, one that mainstream institutions aren't ready to acknowledge. Those who have visited the site describe it as deeply unsettling. Dens speak of an unnatural stillness in the water, of a presence that watches. Sonar equipment sometimes malfunctions near the stones. Cameras have occasionally recorded strange flashes or light distortions. Nothing concrete, but just enough to make you wonder. And then there are the dreams. Several divers, including experienced professionals, have reported vivid dreams after visiting the site. Dreams of vast herds of shaggy beasts, of towering figures moving through mist, of firelight flickering on stone altars beneath the sky heavy with stars. One diver even claimed to see a massive handprint embedded in the lake bed, pressed into the mud like a fossilized echo. All of it could be coincidence, imagination stirred by the weight of mystery. Or it could be something more, a sign that the land, even beneath water, still holds memory. For now, the stones remain underwater, undisturbed, as they have for thousands of years. Divers still visit. Researchers still theorize, and the mastodon carving, if that's what it truly is, still gazes silently from its resting place in the dark. The lake keeps its secrets, but the alignment of those stones, straight as an arrow beneath the silt, feels like a message, a forgotten page in the book of this continent's story. And if we ever manage to read it, we may find that our history is far older and far stranger than we ever imagined. The Devil's Soup Bowl. In the heart of Michigan's Berry County, nestled within the rolling woodlands of Yankee Springs Recreation Area, lies a curious and unsettling geological formation known as the Devil's Soup Bowl. On the surface, it's a quiet natural depression, a steep circular pit surrounded by dense forest echoing with bird calls and the rustle of leaves. But locals know better than to see it as just a quirky landform. For generations, this place has been whispered about in low tones, draped in stories of spirits, strange phenomena, and ancient power. The Devil's Soup Bowl isn't massive by geological standards, but it's dramatic enough to make you pause. From the ridge, the ground seems to fall away suddenly, forming a deep B-shaped crater roughly 60 feet deep and over 100 feet across. Trails wind around and down into the depression where silence thickens and the air feels just a little heavier. Some say compasses spin strangely near the center. Others swear they hear voices faint, undecipherable, especially at dusk. Geologists will tell you it's a glacial kettle formed during the last ice age when a massive chunk of ice broke off from a retreating glacier and got buried in sediment. When the ice finally melted, it left behind the empty bowl we see today. Perfectly natural, perfectly explainable. And yet, people who walk into the Devil's Soup Bowl often come out feeling like they've stepped into something far older, far stranger, and far less explainable. Local Native American legends predate any geological explanations by centuries. To the Potawatomi people who once called this area home, The land was alive with spiritual energy. Some places nurturing and sacred, others dark and volatile. The Devil's Soup Bowl was seen not just as a natural feature, but as a threshold, a kind of spiritual sinkhole where energies pulled and lingered. It was a place of caution, not forbidden, but never approached lightly. One tale speaks of a powerful spirit banished from the earth who fell into the land and left a great hollow behind. Another tells of a battle between sky beings and underworld creatures, their conflict tearing the land and forming the depression. Some believe the bowl is a place where the veil between worlds is thin, a location where dreams can take shape and nightmares can echo back. Even settlers in the 1800s picked up on the unease. Early journals and letters mentioned the area with a kind, oft-nervous fascination. Hunters claimed their dogs refused to go near the bowl's edge. Trappers swore that animals vanished there. No tracks, no blood, just absence. One infamous account tells of a man who descended into the bowl alone and was found the next morning, dazed and unable to speak, staring blankly at the treetops. He recovered eventually, but refused to ever return. By the mid-19th century, the Devil's Soup Bowl had become a hot spot for local daredevils and thrill-seekers. Teens would sneak out at night to spend time in the bowl, hoping to see something strange or prove their courage by simply sitting alone in the center. What they often got instead was disorientation, sudden nausea, or a bone-deep chill that didn't match the weather. Some described the ground as vibrating, subtly but constantly, like it was alive beneath their feet. There have also been stories of lights, blue and white orbs drifting along the ridge, sometimes darting through the trees without making a sound. Hikers report the sensation oft being followed, even when alone. Cameras glitch, phones lose signal, and the forest, usually filled with life, falls eerily silent the deeper you go. One of the most chilling local legends involves a man named Elias Carter, a reclusive farmer from the 1890s. Elias lived a few miles from the bowl and was known for his obsession with sky patterns, which many believe were early attempts to track stars or celestial events. He vanished without a trace one autumn night, leaving behind strange symbols carved into the wooden walls of his barn. Circles within circles, spirals, and what some describe as a figure falling into a pit. Years later, hikers found the same symbols etched into a tree near the soup bowl's edge. Another story, more recent, tells of a group of campers who pitched tents near the bowl one summer. Sometime after midnight, they heard what they described as a low, rhythmic drumming, accompanied by flashes of light from the treetops. Thinking it was other campers playing tricks, they ventured toward the sound only to find nothing. No people, no firelight, just the woods still and cold. The next morning, their footprints, hundreds of them, were gone, like the earth had swallowed their presence. Skeptics argue that the stories are just campfire fodder, born from the area's naturally eerie ambience. And sure, the acoustics within the bowl are strange. Sounds bounce oddly, making a whisper from the rim sound like it's right behind you. Mists settle easily in the depression, giving it an otherworldly look. And the surrounding woods are thick enough to play tricks on the eyes. But even skeptics agree something about the place just feels off. Then there's the matter of the dreams. Multiple people who visited the bowl have reported strangely vivid dreams afterward, often recurring. In them, the forest appears darker than it really is, and the bowl glows faintly like a moonlit crater. Some dream of descending into it and finding structures, stone altars, staircases, or doors leading underground. One woman, who visited only once and never returned, said she dreams of standing at the bowl's center, unable to move while faceless figures ring the ridge above, watching in silence. Of course, there's no proof, no hard evidence, just story after story, layered over time like the leaves that line the forest floor. But sometimes mystery doesn't need proof. It just needs presence, and the Devil's Soup Bowl has that in abundance. Today, the sagittarius, a curious blend of hiking trail, geological exhibit, and local legend. Families picnic on the outer ridges. Park signs give the scientific explanation, but those who know the older stories walk a little slower near the edge. They listen to the wind. They glance back more often than usual. Some believe the bowl is merely sleeping, that the energy within it is dormant, waiting. Others think it's already active, whispering to those sensitive enough to hear. Whatever the truth, the Devil's Soup Bowl remains one of Michigan's strangest, most compelling ancient mysteries. A place where geology and folklore collide, where science draws the outline, but story fills in the color. And when the sun sets, casting long shadows over the rim, the bowl lives up to its name. It doesn't roar, it doesn't scream, it waits, patient and quiet, like it remembers something the rest of us forgot. Mysterious Michigan megaliths. Allegan County. Deep in the wooded stretches of Allegan County, tucked between winding rural roads and shadowy pine forests, lies a little-known riddle that has fascinated fringe archaeologists, local storytellers, and spiritual seekers for decades. Known only in whispered circles as the Michigan megaliths, these mysterious stone arrangements have never made headlines or drawn massive crowds. But for those who know of their existence, they raise a staggering possibility. Were ancient peoples in Michigan building with massive stones in deliberate aligned patterns? Long before modern history records, they had a capability. Unlike the famous megaliths of Europe, Stonehenge in England, Karnak in France, or the dolmens of the Mediterranean, the alleged Michigan megaliths are subtle. They don't tower overhead in open fields. Instead, they're low to the ground, half-buried, scattered across forested glades and ridged lines. And that's what makes them so easy to overlook and so easy to dismiss. But the people who studied them say they were not random, not glacial debris, not natural. The first hints of these mysterious structures emerged in the 1980s when hikers and amateur archaeologists in Allegan County began noticing unusually arranged stone clusters deep in the woods, often far from any known trails, settlements, or modern construction. Some were in linear formations, others circular. Many included stones that appeared to have been shaped or placed with intention, balanced, stacked, or aligned in ways that nature alone couldn't explain. At one site, a row of large boulders, each nearly identical in size, stretches for several hundred feet, pointing almost perfectly north to south. At another, airing of stones forms a near-perfect circle with a larger flat-top stone at its center. More intriguing still, some stones seem to mark celestial events, equinoxes, solstices, moonrise positions. The precision is accidental. These alignments suggest an understanding of astronomy, a deep ancient kind of knowledge passed down through generations. But here's the thing, no one knows who built them. Official archaeological records in Michigan don't acknowledge these sites as legitimate prehistoric structures. They're not protected. They're not studied. In fact, most are undocumented entirely, known only through word of mouth, cryptic map markings, and occasional blurry photo shared online. Some of the sites have been partially dismantled by time, weather, or curious visitors. Others have been covered over by forest regrowth or housing development, vanishing back into the landscape. Still, the legend persists. And for those who've spent time near the stones, camping, meditating, mapping, there's a shared sense of presence. The feeling that someone or something once used these places for sacred or ceremonial purposes. Some report an almost magnetic pull to the center stones. Others describe unusual animal behavior nearby. Deer that freeze and stare. Birds that avoid the area entirely. A few speak of vivid dreams or strange synchronicities after visiting. Not evidence in the scientific sense, but certainly experiences that leave a mark. Among the most studied of these sites is a location known by locals as the Ridge Circle, hidden near a ridgeline east of the Allegan State Game Area. The circle itself is subtle, roughly 30 feet in diameter, made up of medium-sized stones, all worn smooth by age. But when viewed from above using drone footage or LAR scanning, the symmetry becomes obvious. The stones aren't randomly placed. They form a near-perfect ring. Some are embedded deep in the earth, as if they've sat undisturbed for millennia. At the center lies a broad flat stone about 5 feet across, moss-covered and slightly raised. It resembles an altar, though there are no carvings or inscriptions, just its shape, its prominence, and the eerie quiet that surrounds it. Visitors who vespent nights near the ridge circle describe an overwhelming stillness. No crickets, no wind. Some speak of electronic equipment shorting out unexpectedly, phones dying even with full batteries. A few have tried using dowsing rods or EMF meters, claiming elevated readings within the ring. Again, this isn't mainstream science, but it paints a picture. Something is off here. Then there's the matter of oral tradition. Though mainstream academia doesn't connect the Michigan megaliths with indigenous history, some Aisha elders speak of stone places in the deep woods, sites of power, memory, and spiritual transit. Stories tell of ancestors placing stones to mark journeys, track the stars, or speak to the spirits of the land. According to these traditions, the earth itself speaks through such formations, aligning stone with energy, time, and purpose. One elder recounted a tale of singing stones found in the forest. Boulders that would hum or vibrate under certain conditions, especially during solstice. Whether literal or metaphorical, these stories suggest the stones weren't just markers. They were participants active in ritual, alive in a sense we no longer recognize. But if these were indigenous sacred sites, why the secrecy? Why no widespread cultural memory? The answer sadly may lie in suppression. Throughout the 19th and early 20th centuries, native spiritual practices were systematically outlawed and sacred sites were desecrated or ignored. Much of the knowledge was driven underground, preserved only in fragments, protected by silence. Of course, not everyone agrees these structures are ancient. Some argue the megaliths are simply old fieldstones moved by farmers in the 1800s. Michigan's glacial history left behind countless rocks and boulders, many of which were rearranged by early settlers. And that's a fair point, but again, it's the precision, the alignment that makes these different. Field clearing doesn't produce stone circles aligned with solar events. It doesn't create straight rows that stretch for hundreds of feet across uneven forest ground. Then there are the skeptics who believe the mystery is modern folklore. Urban legends born from overactive imaginations and internet echo chambers. To them, the Michigan megaliths are a mix of parabola, wishful thinking, and the human tendency to find meaning in randomness. But what if they're not? What if, scattered through the forests of Allegan County, there really are the remains of a long-lost sacred landscape, older than we understand, deeper than Wedmit? What if the people who built them weren't primitive at all, but attuned to a worldview that saw the earth as live, the stars as teachers, and stone as memory made solid? That possibility lingers in the quiet moments when the woods grow still and the last light of day casts long shadows over mossy stone. If you happen to stumble on one of these formations, maybe by accident, maybe not, you might not feel anything right away, but as you stand there, you'll feel a strange kind of gravity. Not just physical, but emotional, like you're being watched or welcomed or remembered.